This is just something that actually my father wrote that is pretty interesting to anybody in the energy arena. So I wanted to hand it out, and they can circulate. Feel free to make copies or do whatever to pass along the information. But this is great. Very happy to see everyone. Thanks so much for coming and making it to the second Picnic for Peace. Picnic at the plant, aka lunch at the dump. It's really great because I feel like this is a movement that can continue and build into many things, just like what we're commemorating did back in the 70s, 35 years ago. So it's great to see so many people here from all different areas and avenues and ages. So thanks so much for coming. Yeah. Doug, did you want to give us a little talk about all the knowledge that you have about this and what you think you're actually?
I'll try to keep it fairly brief, since I know folks want to be here all day, but I could talk all day on this. My name is Doug Bogan. I'm the Executive Director of Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, which is one of the groups that's involved in the intervention on the current Seabrook relicensing. You probably heard some about. SAPL, Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, has been around since before the plant even got started. It dates back to 1969, so we're 42 years old, older than most of the folks here. And we were involved in the original licensing of the plant. We challenged it in courts. We helped get the second plant stopped. You know, we all worked together to make sure that we didn't see a much broader nuclear promotion development throughout the country. You know, President Nixon, if you remember him, he originally said we were going to have 300 nuclear plants, or I think at one point 1,000 nuclear plants in this country. But it was stopped, and it was stopped right here at Seabrook back in the 1970s. Yeah. And that happened because thousands of people turned out. People put their bodies on the line. You know that people got arrested on this day, or tomorrow, I guess, 35 years ago. They had the first mass arrest, I guess, if you will, 180 people, I believe. And since then, my understanding is over the 10, 15 years succeeding that time, there were over 5,000 people arrested at Seabrook for doing civil disobedience. That's one of the largest mass civil disobedience arrest rates in the world, I believe. So there's this very illustrious history, but you know, we're really about the future. We're about looking ahead and how we can stop this thing from continuing to threaten our lives. And the current battle right now is over the relicensing of the plant. You probably know, but it bears repeating that they have proposed to relicense this plant 20 years ahead of schedule, 20 years ahead of the 2030 license expiration date. And this is status quo, regular business with the federal government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have already relicensed, I believe, about 60 plants out of the 100 and 104 that are currently operating. 60, almost two-thirds of them have already gotten their new licenses. And this despite the fact that we have no experience with plants over 40, 42 years old. The fact is the oldest plant in the country is only about 42 years old. I looked it up, and the oldest nuclear power plant in the whole world only lived to be 47 years old. And that was in Russia. That was the Soviet Union. You know, remember them? We just had the 20th anniversary of their dissolution. And we know what happened to Chernobyl. They don't have the greatest record on nukes as well. But we don't have any experience. This is uncharted territory. So I was quite amazed to hear an official from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at a recent hearing back in July, or back in June, said that with Seabrook specifically on this issue of the degradation of the concrete you may have read about, that we're on uncharted territory. I mean, how many times do we have to hear this, that these guys don't know what they're doing? But they're still rubber stamping these relicensing, and that's what we've got to stop. And that's where we have the opportunity now to make a strong stand and say, no, we are going to be the first plant in the country to not get its license. And so there's a number of events coming up in relation to that the next few months. The deal is this is kind of a slow, tedious, long-term process, they proposed to relicense it back in June of 2009. If everything had gone according to plan and we hadn't intervened, the normal average time it takes to get a new license, and these ones that have been done elsewhere in the country, happened in 22 months. Okay, from June of 2009, that would take them to April of next year, April 2012. They would have their license, they'd be good to go, and we wouldn't have a word to say edgewise in the matter. But because we intervened, they've had to drag out the process, they have to hold hearings, and now, of course, with Fukushima and with this issue of the concrete, the foundations of the plant coming apart, they're delaying it at least a year, and probably longer. There have been other plants that have been delayed for 4 or 5 years. They're still fighting over the relicensing of the Indian Point plant in New York, just up the river from New York City, and the Pilgrim plant down in Plymouth, Massachusetts. They're both kind of downwind of us, by the way, so we need to be watching them. And of course, Vermont Yankee just got its license renewed, despite the fact that they did it the day after Fukushima happened. And of course, the state is adamantly opposed to that. That's going to be a big battle. The owners of that plant are still planning to reload the fuel. They have to refuel every few years, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But here at Seabrook, we have a different kind of plant, but we have the same basic issues. If you followed what happened in Fukushima, one of the key issues was that their emergency backup generators were hit by the tsunami. They failed. Then their electric power batteries were only able to run for 8 hours, and then all power was out. All the pumps, all the controls, all the important equipment that runs the plant were dead in the water. And we know that now that the meltdown, at least the first reactor, started happening just hours after the accident, probably before the tsunami hit. But we do know for sure that when the power went out throughout the plant, they were really in deep doo-doo, and that's when everything really went all to hell. We had the hydrogen explosions. If you've seen the pictures, it's a total shambles. And despite the fact you're not hearing much in the newspapers about it, it's getting worse. They're finding cracks in the ground around the plant. The plants are very unstable. Some people think one of them could collapse any day now. One more earthquake could split the whole thing open, and we could have mass amounts of radiation being released. Amazingly, 30 years after the fact, the concept of the China syndrome that came out in the 1970s, you might have seen the film starring Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon, great movie, but back then it was all just theoretically. Well, maybe this could happen. Oh, don't worry, we built these containments strong enough to prevent that. But now we know at Fukushima that did not happen. There is the China syndrome going on, except actually in Japan they call it the Brazil syndrome, because it's the idea that it'll melt through the center of the earth and come out the other end, which in their case is Brazil. But here we call it the China syndrome. Of course, it won't go through the whole earth. What it's going to do is hit the water table, which at Fukushima is pretty darn close because they're right on the ocean. Same here at Seabrook, we're right on the ocean, and when water hits nuclear radioactive melted material, it goes boom, and you have a steam explosion, and nobody really knows what's going to happen, but it could be really horrendous. So we haven't seen the end. In fact, we're really in some ways just at the beginning of the Fukushima disaster, and there's a lot of really scary predictions about the health impacts. Obviously, the Japanese government doesn't have a clue what to do about it, and of course we need to prevent any future Fukushimas. So of course that needs to be our rallying cry. Here at Seabrook we have perhaps a little more mundane issue, and that has to do with the relicensing and the fact that they're projecting 20 or more years into the future. They want a 20-year extension that would take them up to 2050, way beyond most of our lifetimes. But they're so brilliant, that they think they know what shape that plant's gonna be in 40 years from now. And we're saying, maybe you don't. Maybe you haven't been right so far. Maybe you're not considering all the alternatives. And so our contention, our intervention to the relicensing has to do with the fact that all federal big projects of this sort have to be done in an environmentally sound manner, and they have to use an environmental impact statement, and that's what they've drafted. That's what this meeting coming up September 15th is all about. And an environmental impact process, this is something that dates back to, you know, when we got started back in the early 70s. They are required to look at all the alternatives. They have to look at what other power sources we can have besides nuclear. They have to look at all the environmental impacts, of course, and we are contending that they have not done that. They haven't done their homework. They are using obsolete, out-of-date information specifically about wind power. If you've been following the news, you know that wind power is just growing dramatically. In Europe, it doubles every year. In this country, it's been doubling every 3 years. This is a huge development going on, and it's under the radar of most of the major media. Certainly the folks running the new plants aren't following it. And amazingly enough, Florida Power and Light, the owners of Seabrook, they're the biggest onshore wind power developer in the country, but they don't think offshore has any potential, or they haven't bothered to invest in it. But they're missing out, because that's the long-term big ticket item where we're going to get thousands of megawatts of power. I can go on more about it if people want to hear, but somebody get that sign? Sorry. But the state of Maine has already proposed to build 5,000 megawatts, that's 4 Seabrook plants, in the next 20 years. Amazingly enough, they picked the year 2030, exactly the same date that Seabrook is due to be end of its license. And that's going to be enough power to power the whole state of Maine and import some to, you know, states like New Hampshire that don't have their act together. We'll probably be buying it from folks in Maine. And there are many other sources to consider, certainly, and many other opportunities with renewables, but this is the best big alternative that appears to be coming down the road, and is obviously much more safer, more affordable, more reliable, more resilient. You know, if you have global warming, sea level rise, you can move your wind turbines, you can adjust them so they can, in fact, they're building some that will be floating on sea level, so it doesn't matter where sea level is. But a nuke plant, obviously, you can't move it, it's stuck where it is, and it's going to be subject to all the impacts that we're going to see from climate change. I'm sure you're all aware that the country's not doing much about climate disruption, and we're going to see increases in sea level, increased storms. We're already seeing it now, if anybody who watches the news. So we need to keep pressing these issues. We need to keep telling them that they don't know what they're doing, that we are not willing to just sit back and let them call the shots. So the first event coming up is in 3 weeks, September 15th. This is going to be in Hampton at 1 Liberty Lane. I'm not sure if that's off 101 or...
It's off the little bypass. If you head out toward Exeter on the Exeter-Hampton Road, it's a left out there.
Okay,
Used to
so
be Wheeler
if you get off on the 101 exit, it's right off in Hampton, just, I guess, east of 95, right?
Yeah.
You'll find it pretty easily. And it's 1 Liberty Lane East, and it's starting at 1:30 p.m. They're going to do 2 sessions, so you have a choice. But you have it your way. You can be there at 1:30 to 4:30, or you can be there at 7 to 10 in the evening. So whether you can be there during the day or be there during the evening, please be there. And it's all about the environmental impact statement. It's available online. It's about 350 pages. I don't know if I'll read it all, but if you want to take a look at it, and I can forward it to folks if you want to get into it. But the basic message is, hey, you guys didn't consider the alternatives. You need to go back and do your homework. We don't think this environmental impact statement is acceptable, and they need to do a better job, and they owe it to us. So we'll be hoping to put together some talking points, some specific things you can bring up. I plan to have some stickers that say consider the alternatives. You can just wear them. We call them silent agitators. If you don't feel like getting up in public, you can bring signs, whatever. I think they're probably, I know at the last hearing they required that signs be no bigger than like 10 by 12, which is kind of silly, but they don't want to have a lot of big things that might obstruct people's movement. But we do want to have a big presence there, obviously, so I do hope you can be there for that event. There will be hearings in October. The relicensing intervention that we've started, in theory, is going to meet in early October, but we don't know yet. There may be some delays to that, as I've mentioned. This will drag out over the next couple of years, so please stay tuned. I'll be working to get the word out through email and other messages, and I think I'll probably stop there. But again, appreciate everybody coming out. It's great to see all sorts of folks, and let's keep at it. Thank you.